If you're just joining us this morning, you'll want to know that I have been preaching a summer series that I've called a six-pack for summer, 6 Psalms to Live By. My intent was to offer a different kind of six-pack for the summer. And the title of today's message is Living a Life That Blesses God. The common thread running through my summer series is a blessed life. My contention is that many of the Psalms give us both a description of a blessed life and guidance for how to live a blessed life. The first message in this series looked at how Psalm 1 defines a blessed life in terms of what you don't do and what you do in order to live a blessed life. You don't walk in the counsel of the wicked, for example. You do walk according to the commands of the Lord. Psalm 1 lays the foundation for a blessed life. The second message explored some of the practices of spiritual disciplines necessary to a blessed life. Psalm 37 opened up to us some of the secrets to living a blessed life. The third message dealt with the painful reality of what we do when we screw up and seriously damage our relationship with God, which is at the core of a blessed life. Today, in the fourth message of the series, I want to pursue our theme from a different perspective. I want to talk about living a life that blesses God. So often when we think about blessings, we think mostly about ways we are blessed. How does God bless us? How can we experience God's blessings? There's even a song that begins, "Count your blessings, name them one by one." And in the chorus there is the line, "Count your many blessings, see what God has done." It is a good thing to be aware of the many ways God seeks to bless our lives, and it is important that we be grateful to God for all the good things that He sends into our lives. But if we fixate only on what God has done for us, we can become very self-focused, and our gratitude can slide into an entitlement attitude that asks, "What has God done for me lately? Come on, God, I need some more blessings. Can you start them down the pipeline soon?" Psalm 98 gives us the antidote for the spiritual malady of self-centeredness that leads to dissatisfaction with God's treatment of us and impatient wanting for more. The first 3 verses remind us what God has done for us. Verses 4 through 8 describe how we can live in a way that blesses God. And verses 8 and 9 tell us why we can live that way. Let's hear Psalm 98. We'll let it speak for itself, and then we'll take a closer look at what it says. Sing to the Lord a new song, for He has done marvelous things. His right hand and His holy arm have worked salvation for Him. The Lord has made His salvation known and revealed His righteousness to the nations. He has remembered His love and His faithfulness to the house of Israel. All the ends of the earth have seen the salvation of our God. Shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth. Burst into jubilant song with music. Make music to the Lord with the harp and the sound of singing, with trumpets and the blast of the ram's horn. Shout for joy before the Lord, the King. Let the sea resound and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. Let the rivers clap their hands. Let the mountains sing together for joy. Let them sing before the Lord, for He comes to judge the earth. He will judge the world in righteousness and the peoples with equity. Now let's unpack the 3 parts of this psalm. Part 1, verses 1 through 3, recount some of the wonderful things God has done for us, the ways in which God lives that bless us. In the struggles of life, God has won the victory, and He has done so by His own activity in human history. For Israel, the authors of this psalm, God gave them military victory against their enemies. For us, God's victory more often takes the form of overcoming our emotional and spiritual enemies. Whatever plagues us, whatever keeps us from fully experiencing the life God made for us, the Lord has vanquished. The reason God has done this is important. God has acted on our behalf because He has remembered His loyal love and faithfulness to the house of Israel. In other words, God has remembered the covenant He made with Abraham. We who share the Christian faith are children of Abraham and beneficiaries of God's covenant, because we believe the full intent of God's covenant was realized in Jesus. Through Christ, God has remembered His loyal love and faithfulness to us, and has stretched out His strong hand and holy arm to give us the victory we need over the forces that seek to separate us from God and God's purpose for us. Psalm 98 verse 1 gives us the appropriate response to the many wonderful things God has done. Sing a new song to the Lord. The idea of a new song suggests a change in status, a change in circumstances. Something is different. Life has changed. We have a new reason to sing to the Lord. The old dirges that bemoaned our life, the tired old empty songs the world has taught us, won't do any longer. God has liberated us, and a new song of gratitude and hope and victory is required. And verses 4 through 6 expand on how we sing this new song. I love the way the Common English Version and the Message put these verses. I've taken the best from each one. Shout triumphantly to the Lord, all the earth. Be happy. Rejoice out loud. Sing your praises. Round up an orchestra to play for God. Add on 100-voice choir. Feature trumpets and big trombones. Fill the air with praises to the Lord, the King. Think back to the last Super Bowl that had a team in it you really cared about. They won the biggest football game of the year. Their fans went berserk. They sang and shouted and spilled out into the streets and turned over cars and kissed people they barely knew. They couldn't contain themselves. Their team gave them a victory, and they were elated. That's the kind of response Psalm 98 is describing. God has given us life's most important victory. All the teams that opposed us have been defeated. The final score is God 1,000 and the world 0. Zip. Nada. The power sin had over us is broken. The spirits that sought to oppress us have been sent packing. We get to go home in victory. We have to be happy and rejoice out loud and shout triumphantly and sing our praises. We have to bless God. And our response to the wonderful things God does is how we bless the Lord. We give God the credit God is due. We recognize God as the King of life, the ruler of the universe, the Redeemer of our souls. And we are deeply, deeply grateful and happy and exuberant. We sing a new song. We bask in the glory of God's love and faithfulness. We continue the celebration on a daily basis. And it gets better. In verses 7 and 8, most translations read, "Let the sea, let the rivers, let the mountains rejoice." But the Good News translation renders these verses as commands. "Roar, sea, and every creature in you. Sing, earth, and all who live on you. Clap your hands, you rivers. You hills, sing together with joy before the Lord." I can almost hear the psalmist say, "Come on, get to it. Join the celebration over what God has done." I love the idea that even nature is aware of, participates in, and rejoices over the victory of our God. The forces that would keep us from God have not only injured us, but nature as well. The whole creation has a stake in how this all turns out. And then the last verse of the psalm, verse 9, tells us why such exuberant joy and praise to God is essential. It says, "Because he comes to rule the earth." And unlike most of those who have tried to rule the earth and made a mess of it, God will rule the peoples of the world with justice and fairness. Do you know what image popped into my mind when I read the phrase, "because he comes to rule the earth"? I immediately thought of an 8th grade study hall where the teacher has not yet arrived and most of the class has erupted into chaos. They are up and moving around, scuffling with each other in the aisles between the desks, writing obscene graffiti on the boards, going to places on the internet they shouldn't go, shouting each other down, arguing over politics, acting out petty jealousies and romantic rivalries. Like I said, the place is erupting in general chaos. But in the corner of the room there sits a small group of students who are trying to study. They are not participating in the antics of the rest of the study hall. They are troubled by the behavior of their peers, and they wish it would stop, but they are powerless to do anything about it. They are frustrated and upset, and maybe even afraid of what all this chaos will escalate into. And then on the sudden, something happens that instantaneously changes the conditions in the room. Suddenly the miscreants dive for their seats. They whip out their books and at least try to appear as if they had been studying. The din of noise drops to silence. Order is restored. What happened? Yes, the teacher entered the room, and everything changed. The sea will roar, the earth will sing, the rivers will clap their hands, the mountains will sing together with joy, because the Lord has come into the room. God has come to rule the earth, to create order out of our chaos, to turn from their ways the bullies of the earth, and to comfort and release the victims of earth's chaos and craziness, because God will rule the peoples of the earth with justice and fairness. God will replace the failed nations and corrupt kingdoms of earth with God's kingdom and God's rule. And everything will be different, and the whole of creation and all the peoples of the earth will bless God and rejoice. This was the hope of Israel, each time God gave them victory over their enemies. Israel proclaimed anew their faith in God as King. They dedicated themselves anew to live as His people in the world, but they were not able to do so. So exile came, and the hope of a Messiah was born, the hope of one sent from God who would be able to fulfill God's purpose for Israel and the world. And we who follow Jesus believe that He was God's anointed one, which is the meaning of the word Messiah. And many of us in the Christian movement have accepted the Jewish expectation that the Lord's Messiah will establish God's kingdom and rule on earth, and God will finally rule with justice and fairness. But we look around, and it hasn't happened. And there is not much hope that it will happen anytime soon. So many Christians have adopted another Jewish point of view, one that believes the promised kingdom is yet to come. The Jews are still waiting for their Messiah. We Christians are waiting for our Messiah's return, the second coming of Jesus, believing that when He comes again, God will establish His kingdom and rule on earth, and the old order of things will finally pass away forever. Only, what are we supposed to do in the meantime? Jesus spoke to this, but we often forget what He said. He said the kingdom of God is at hand. He meant that it is already here, not on the global scale that people of faith rightfully hope for, but it is to be found in little pockets of human experience that are literally outposts of the kingdom to come. And Jesus taught us a prayer that puts us in touch with God's kingdom on earth here and now. He taught us to pray, "Thy kingdom come, Thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven." Now this is no pie-in-the-sky by-and-by prayer. It is a proclamation that wherever we do God's will, living righteously and working for justice and fairness, God's kingdom is right there, right now. We bless God every time we create an outpost of His kingdom by doing God's will on earth as it is in heaven.